welcome to a new episode of Extreme Reloading. Hey, we're starting a brand new series today, and really it applies to any caliber that you might be reloading for, any round that you're reloading for, but we're going to use that 8mm Mauser as our example throughout this series. And I call this series Crafting Consistency. You know, Major Plaster said a long time ago that consistency equals accuracy. And boy, I really have taken those words of wisdom to heart and seeking ultimate consistency. But let's think about that. And what we're concerned with, of course, when we're reloading is the consistency of our ammunition. What Major Plaster was concerned with and what he was talking about was the whole gamut of consistency, from the ammo to the consistency of the rifle itself, as well as the shooter. But I'm concerned with the consistency of the ammunition. And here's an assumption that we're going to be working with throughout this series, and that is that the ammunition is more or less independent of all other variables. So we're going to assume that this ammunition that we're talking about is being fired in the same rifle at the exact same ambient temperature and the exact same chamber temperatures as well. Now, realizing that in reality is pretty darn difficult. The ambient temperatures can be pretty stable. Chamber temperatures are going to change as you're firing, unless you really wait for it to cool down. You know, who knows how long that's going to take. But we have a theoretical scenario or situation that we're working with. So, crafting consistency for the 8mm Mauser, it will apply, as I said, to any cartridge that you're reloading for. Let's look at this case all by itself to begin with. Is this case identical in all ways to another 8mm Mauser case, and yet another, and another, and another? The answer, of course, is no. They are not absolutely identical. But what difference does it make? Well, we'll talk about that as we get going here. We'll start from the bottom and work our way to the top. And what I mean, the bottom, here I'm talking about the primer pocket, and the flash hole. And then we talk about the interior of that case and its case capacity. We can talk about the exterior dimensions of the case, the thickness of the case, the actual consistency of the case itself, how it is affected by the heating and the cooling. Then we can talk, of course, about the neck. Very important little piece right here. Talk about neck tension that's put onto the bullet, consistent neck tension, and ultimately we'll talk about the powder that goes into this and the bullet that tops it all off. Now today I'm going to focus on two things. As I said, we're going to start from the bottom and work our way to the top. So let's start by talking about this primer pocket. Now, what can we say about the primer pocket itself? Well, how does the primer pocket affect our ammunition? And there's a couple ways in which it does that. Number one, the depth. The depth of the primer pocket is important, because as we seat that primer into the primer pocket, if we seat it consistently deep with the RCBS RAM unit, which I really like to set primers very consistently, well, it's consistent to the base of the rim of the case itself. But if the primer pocket has varying depth to it, it's not all the same depth, well, then that primer, even though it was sat as consistently or seated as consistently as we possibly could, it's still going to ignite the powder in a slightly different way. So we can pretty easily true this up using the primer pocket uniformer in our RCBS case head station or a similar tool like that. So that's good. And that's some relatively low-hanging fruit that we can harvest. The other thing that we can do pretty easily for the primer pocket is to look at and deal with the flash hole. Now, in some cases, I've seen flash holes that are offset. And in fact, this one is a little bit offset. If we find one, and I've seen these in 223 or 556 ammo that are pretty poorly offset, if you're really trying to craft highly accurate precision ammunition, you just got to chuck that case, and it may be used for, you know, some blasting ammo or just for some fun, but it certainly wouldn't make it into your gold best ammo. This one's pretty good. It looks like it's a little bit offset, but the other thing that we can do, of course, is to true up the flash hole using the flash hole uniforming tool that I use from Lyman. Nice little tool. And that will make sure that the flash hole is the same on the inside. Puts a little bit of a bevel on it, and also makes sure that it's the same size. Pretty low-hanging fruit. It's a job that you do once in the life of the case, just like the primer pocket uniforming tool. So that's cool stuff. Now, the other thing we want to talk about on primers is the primer that we're actually putting in here, and we want that to be as consistent as possible. And I have found that the bench rest primers from CCI are a huge improvement over any sort of standard primer. I've also found that Federal's gold match, or their AR primer for the AR 223 556 caliber, those really do make a difference in consistent ignition, reducing the extreme spread and standard deviation from shot to shot to shot. And so that's a great investment. I kind of call that low-hanging fruit also. Just buy a little bit different, a little bit better. Yes, it's a little bit more expensive primer, and it will pay dividends pretty much immediately. But now let's talk about the case capacity. That's the second topic we're going to deal with today. Why care about case capacity, the interior dimensions of these cases? Well, if you think about it, once the primer ignites and that little explosion goes through the flash hole and it contacts the powder then burns very rapidly, as you know. Building pressure, the pressure is such, and it ejects the bullet, and the rest is history, right? But if we put the same amount of powder, let's just say 42 grains of Varget. We put 42 grains of Varget in this case, and we measure it precisely on our electric scale, 42.0 grains. And we've done all of our homework on the primers. Well, what else is affecting how rapidly that powder is burning, how that powder burns, and ultimately the point at which the pressure is such that it ejects that bullet? Well, that's case capacity. It's sort of the pressure cooker idea that we have a contained vessel of a certain volume, and as that pressure reaches a certain point, you know, if things are working right, the little unit on top will start chicking, right? And that's when you turn the heat down so you don't blow the whole thing up. Same kind of concept here. We got the same powder inside here, very consistent ignition from the primer. And the problem then is if the case capacity is different from round to round, well then of course we're going to get slightly different ejection of that bullet. The point at which it reaches that certain pressure will vary from round to round. So having a very consistent case capacity is important. Now the hard part here is measuring case capacity. we can estimate case capacity as a correlate, meaning if we weigh the case, we're making a number of assumptions. Number one, this case consists of the same type of brass, which is an alloy, of copper, zinc, and lead and tin, and so on and so forth. And our guarantee that it's a very consistent alloy is just about looking at the head stamp. That's about it, and the lot of brass that you're dealing with. That's our best right there. So there's a little bit of uncertainty that we're already dealing with. But okay, that's as good as we're going to do. We don't have any other control on that. So if we weigh this, and we find that this case, Hornady, and another, and another, and another, are very, very similar in weight, that tells us that we're probably dealing with a very similar case capacity. That also assumes that the exterior dimensions are identical. And we make sure of that when we do our full-length resizing. And then they're as good as we're going to possibly get those in exterior dimension consistency. So that's also a good thing, and a pretty easy thing right there. But there's still going to be some variability. It's not necessarily a perfect correlation by weighing this case and comparing it. Now there's another way to deal with case capacity, and it's an estimate of case capacity based on displacement. I have a video on that, and it works okay. It's really sloppy. It's hard to get a good measurement of that. And so, I experimented with that a while ago. I don't really do it anymore because I'm not sure that those measures are truly repeatable and able to differentiate low capacity cases from high capacity cases. Another thing that I had done years ago that I don't do anymore is to fill the case, leave the primer in, a spent primer, fill the case with water, and then I weigh that, dump that water out, and the difference then is the case capacity. Now the problem with that is, again, it's very difficult to get repeatable measures using that methodology. We're going to look at that in a little experiment coming right up. Okay, here's the results of what you might want to call a standard case sorting. Remember, this is all Hornady brass, and I've got 4 boxes of once fired brass. This is the factory stuff I've been shooting, or we've been shooting so far. And what we'll see here is that we're ranging all the way from 154.9 to, well, essentially off the scales at over 160 grains. Those heavy weights over there are going to kind of get culled out because I didn't get enough of the heavy weights to make, a box of 20 or anything meaningful for reloading. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to resort those, taking first this average area. It was pretty well distributed, but there's a lot of cases right over here. If I take these 4, this makes 7, 10, and 15. Now 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, right over there. That'd be a nice box with only a variability of 156.4 through 157. So only a variability of a little over a half grain, 6/10 of a grain. So that's going to be a very good box. I'll do similar things right over here. And I'll do a similar grouping on this far end. And then I'm going to have some that's going to end up in a bag, and those are going to be kind of leftovers. Maybe I need to use them in the future, something like that. Kind of the cull ammo. Maybe I'll use it for just a little bit of shooting, whatever. But my best stuff is going to be sorted. And now here is the factory, brand new factory Hornady ammo. you'll notice in contrast to the once fired Hornady ammo that this ammo tends to be skewed a little bit to the left, let's say. In other words, you probably remember that we had kind of the hump, the majority of rounds of brass cases were right around this area in that once fired Hornady brass cases. And we had some stuff way off the board, off to the right, and in fact we had some stuff off to the left as well. So this 50 rounds or 50 cases are perhaps a little bit more consistent. However, it's only 50 compared to 80, and if anything it's shifted a little bit to the left. So similarly, I'm going to grab, starting here, 3 rounds, 6, 9, 11, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, 19, and 20. So I'll be at 8/10 of a grain variability in that box of 20. Then it gets a little bit better here. Here we're able to get a nice box of 20 and only have about half a grain of variability. Okay, and here's our results after sorting. Now I have a half grain variation here, 157.1 to 157.6, but I only have 9 brass cases here. Then I have a very nice full box. These are really like these. It'd be my A+, or gold brass, if you want to call it that. 6/10 of a grain, and I have a full box of 20. 9/10 of a grain, another full box. Then we go to 1.5 grain variability in the case weights. Almost a full box, 19. And then my heavy weights over here. Kind of a bit of a cull, maybe useful for some experiments, or just a little bit of blasting, whatever. Every one of those cases is greater than 158.7 grains in this 10 brass cases there. You know, there's lots of different ways of doing your case sorting, and some folks don't do any case sorting at all. In some instances, like last season when we were reloading for the 5.56 and 2.23, we saw that, you know, in those AR type platforms, that really the only case sorting that you had to do to improve the precision and consistency of your ammo just a little bit was to sort them by head stamp. All the Federals in one spot, all the Lake City in another spot, and that was about as far as you had to go. In other instances, as in Season 2, when I was reloading for the .308 Winchester and the Ruger precision rifle, we went a lot further than that. And using Lapua brass, we sorted those by weight. And we've done experiments on different styles of or methods of case sorting, where we're going to take this case, fill it with water, and weigh it. Now my concern with this, and I used to do this, my concern is that how repeatable is that measure of case capacity using this water? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to measure the weight of these cases, and I'm going to measure the weight 3 times for a number of different cases that I have here. And then I'm going to repeat that same methodology and measure the capacity. I'm going to fill this case once, measure it, I'm going to dump it out, fill it a second time, weigh it, dump it out, fill it a third time, weigh it, and dump it out yet a third time. And my concern is that while the measured weight of the case is going to be very consistent, that the capacity is not going to be that consistent. The reason for that is it's very difficult to determine, yes, this is absolutely filled. We're dealing with a meniscus. How filled is this thing? What am I calling filled? Did I spill a little bit over? Do I have water on the outside of the case? Etc., etc. So let's get started and see how this goes. Case number 1, direct measurement. This case we can see is 162.0 grains. Well, it was a minute ago. Okay, now it has steadied again. Very good. 162.0. I'll put this back in. Case number 2. This case is 162.1 grains. And case number 3. A little bit heavier at 162.6 grains. Now I'm going to repeat the same process, measuring the weight of case number 1. Comes back at 162.0. Case number 2. 162.1. Very consistent when we measure the weight several times. Very repeatable measure. A little bit of variability here attributable to the tolerances of this scale. And I suspect that this last case, toggling kind of between the 162.6 and 162.7, this case is probably about 162.65, 66.67, something like that. And so it's splitting that within its measuring capabilities, its own tolerances built into this scale. Now let's go ahead and do case capacity by filling these with filtered water. Now the question is, do we call this full? We've actually stacked the water up pretty good. Unfortunately, I've actually spilt a little bit on the outside of the case. This is my first case I'm working on. I'm going to wipe it off a little bit. Okay. And it's spilling all over the place. Let's give her a try. Now I'm going to record the full weight, and obviously the capacity is going to be this full weight, in this case 225.4 grains, minus the weight of the case itself. Try to get all of it out. Let's go to case number 2. Again, got a little spill there. A little bit on the sides. Wipe that off. Measure it. This one comes in at 225.1. Steadied up there. And case number 3. Comes in at 226.9. Okay, back to case number 1 again. Fill it back up. How's that look? Oh, that's full. Now it's coming in at 227.9 grains, and maybe I overfilled that a bit much. Let's take it down a little bit. And now it's 226.9, whereas originally it was 225.4 during the first weighing. Okay, I'm going to continue this, and then we'll compare the consistency and repeatability of these measurements. I just finished weighing the case capacity of the last of my cases, doing 3 repetitions of each. And very clearly, even before I run some statistics on this, we can see that we don't have the consistency when we're measuring capacity with this kind of direct method where we're trying to fill it up with water and so on and so forth. We do have wonderful consistency when we're simply very directly weighing the case. Now, looking at this water filling method, why isn't it consistent? Well, I think it all comes down to what a person calls full in the case. Even though, if there's a little bit of water on the outside, I was careful in all cases to wipe that out. If we come up here and we look at this, gee, that looks full, but can I fit any more in? Maybe one more drop. Sure enough, that fit in, didn't overflow, looks good, still quite full, no overflow. Now let's weigh it. 226.7, I've just added 2/10 of a grain of water. Can I add another drop? Looks pretty good. May look a little bit fuller, but a person might say, if you're doing a lot of these cases, yeah, that's full, it's not dripping down the sides. Let's see what we have now. And now we've gone up to 227.4. I've added almost a full grain, 9/10 of a grain compared to my beginning weight for this. This is a heck of a tedious method. And scientifically, when we cannot get repeatable measures, then we tend to lose our confidence that that's a good measure to use in the first place, because the variability is such that we really can't say too much about how these cases may be different from one another in case capacity. Well, I'm going to go ahead and run these numbers, run the statistics on both of these. We'll take a look at that in just a little bit. The numbers are in, and it's kind of interesting results. First of all, as we look at the variability of measures in case capacity, we see essentially no variability. It's a very, very consistent, repeatable measure, measuring case weight on that scale. However, we can't say the same thing about measuring case capacity by filling that case with water and making that measurement like we were just doing. That measurement technique has a tremendous amount of variability, as we just saw. And in fact, when we look back again at case weight, that technique of measuring allows us to reliably differentiate one case from another and say with confidence that case 1 weighs less than case 2, which also weighs less than case 3. We can't say the same thing with the case capacity technique. You see, what we're looking at is the red squares indicate the mean of those measures. But the variability expressed as standard deviation is shown in those whiskers, the black lines above and below the mean. And what this is telling us, or what this is showing us, is that anywhere along that line should be or needs to be considered a valid measurement. And therefore, we cannot differentiate case 1 from case 2 from case 3 regarding case capacity with this measuring technique. And that's simply because those lines overlap one another. Does this mean that case capacity actually varies somehow from case to case? No, not at all. The case capacity is going to be very consistent, very constant. However, we're having a devilish time accurately or precisely measuring case capacity using this methodology. So I went one step further on this analysis and actually looked for a correlation. Is there a correlation between case weight, as we measured it, and case capacity? Well, just analyzing by the mean value, there is no correlation present between those two, which is surprising. However, we cannot omit the variability of the measures, those whiskers that we're looking at. And when we introduce those back in, the correlation could be a perfect correlation, absolutely perfect correlation, or it could be a terrible correlation. What can we say about that then? Nothing. Really, we can say nothing about it. We cannot even answer the question, does case weight correlate well with case capacity? The variability in case capacity measurements just will not support any sort of decision along that line. And that's kind of too bad. For me, though, I am going to continue working with case weight sorting, or sorting by case weight. It has worked for me so well in the past to drive down the variability and increase the consistency of my ammunition that it has reaped benefits. And you know what? It really is low-hanging fruit. It's so simple to do. Just again with a nice reloading scale, you pop that case on there, measure that weight, jot it down, put it out on a dining room table or something like that, like I've been doing. And it's really, really simple. And it's a one-time thing. You don't have to do it each time you load these. This is the initial case preparation and case sorting. From that point on, we're going to keep our gold A+ brass here, our A- brass over there, and we're going to track it all the way through its life until we eventually toss it out at the end. Maybe 5, 6, 7 loadings. I don't know how long we're going to get out of this 8mm Mauser. And I want to preserve this brass, remember, because 8mm Mauser is not as easy to get a hold of as is 308 or 243 or 5.56. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Extreme Reloading. We've got some more coming up in just a couple of weeks.